Please join me in welcoming Bill McKibben to Portland, Maine by satellite from his home in Middlebury, Vermont.
I apologize for the technological difficulties, and I wish I was there with you in person. Portland's one of my favorite places on the planet. But there's something to be said for all of us learning how to do these things in other ways that don't use much carbon. And so I'm glad to be working out the kinks with you tonight. I'll just talk for a few minutes because we're behind schedule, and I know you've got an amazing panel there full with lots of friends of mine. But I did want to say a few things. Today was a tough day. Today we learned that one of the great environmental activists, environmental justice activists in the world, Cherry in Honduras, was assassinated. She's been working to stop big dam projects, and that's left her unpopular. Today we learned that in the course of the day, it was a historic day. It appears to be the first time in human history that the northern hemisphere was taken as a whole, a full 2 degrees centigrade above the long-term planetary average. That is, that we're beginning to reach the temperature levels that we've been saying we're going to do everything we could to prevent. We learned yesterday that the first official climate refugees in the United States, the Indian tribe in Louisiana, are having to abandon their land because it's sinking beneath the water. And of course, we continue to talk morning after morning with our colleagues in Fiji, who just absorbed the worst hurricane in their part of the world ever, the highest wind speeds ever measured in the southern hemisphere, a storm that wiped out about 10% of their GDP, i.e. in financial terms did about 15 times the damage of Hurricane Katrina. So it's been a hard few days, which means that it's a real pleasure to get to join with you all and talk about the emerging movement and the emerging battle around climate change. That's the most widespread movement and fight probably in human history. One of profound and preeminent reasons that we need to take on climate change and take it on so fast is because of its effect on peace around the world. There is no way to have a peaceful planet that's being physically destabilized. And we can see that now almost everywhere. There was a series of new scientific papers that came out today making clear that the drought in Syria that helped kick off the current conflict there was the deepest drought in at least 900 years, and completely linked to the rapid increase in global average temperature. When that drought hit, people had to leave their farms and move into the city, and there was no way that the already fragile and authoritarian Assad government could cope with that. And so the chaos that resulted is what we see. And it spreads obviously around the world. But the same story happens over and over and over again in place after place. It's forced to take the funds that it would otherwise use for development and for peace and instead spend them on horrible complications that come from warming the planet. Right now in our hemisphere is the rapid spread of the Zika virus on the wings of the Aedes aegypti mosquito, which in turn is spread up and down the hemisphere because of the rapid warming and the more intense humidity of the hot world that we're building. There are now 5 countries in our hemisphere where public health authorities have told women not to have children for the time being because of the potential damage. Around the world, people are building walls long before Donald Trump ever gets the opportunity. The Indians have built a 2,500-mile wall between them and Bangladesh because they know that the sea is rising rapidly, and they know where the 200 million people in Bangladesh are going to try to go. And there's no vacant real estate in India for them to go to. This is story the world round, and it intensifies with each passing month as the temperature rises, conditions get more bleak. And of course, this will sharpen as expected. The temperature rises another 2 to 3, 4 degrees Celsius in the course of this century. The agronomists have told us flat out that from this point on, each degree increase in global average temperature is going to cut grain yields about 10%. All of you know enough about world peace to know what will happen in a world that's 2 or 3 degrees warmer and with 20 or 30% fewer calories. That is absolute recipe for endless instability. And so it is incumbent upon us to try and stop this before it can get any worse. You watch the nations of the world come together in Paris, and they actually made a certain amount of progress. The rhetoric that came out of the Paris Agreement was pretty good. World leaders committed the planet to try and keep temperature increases to 1.5 degrees Celsius, 2 degrees Celsius at the worst, which would mean that we need to end the fossil fuel age now and go to renewable energy as fast as is humanly possible. This is a great emergency. The rhetoric was good. The actual plans put forward were less good. If you add up all the numbers, as the computer modelers quickly did, the pledges that the planet put forth at that great conference add up to a world that's about 3.5 degrees Celsius warmer, a world where we can't have civilization of the kind that we're accustomed to. And that's why we need very badly to go to work. And the good news is that people are finally going to work. Paris came out better than the conference in Copenhagen some years earlier, precisely because that is a giant movement in every corner of the planet. 400,000 people marched in New York City in the fall of 2014. Perhaps some of you were there. It was the biggest demonstration about anything in our country in a very long time. And as President Obama said at the UN 6 weeks later, when people march, we have to listen. No leader felt that they could come home from Paris empty-handed as they could from Copenhagen. It was a great vindication of the role of movements and of protest in forcing political action. But now we have to step up that action in order to hold those nations accountable to the promises that they made. So all over the world, people are doing just that. There's this giant divestment movement underway to put pressure on the fossil fuel industry. And increasingly it's working. In many ways, it began there in Maine with the brave commitment of tiny Unity College in Maine to divest its small portfolio. And now spread all over the world. And when we were in Paris, Leonardo DiCaprio announced that endowments portfolios worth $3.4 trillion had agreed to begin divesting of fossil fuels. That's a big deal. It's a big deal that we're able now to sometimes block new infrastructure projects, the Keystone Pipeline, or the great work that people in South Portland have done to stop the pipeline they want to run down. Or the amazing work that's going on place after place around the continent. As the head of the American Natural Gas Association said last spring, we somehow have to stop the Keystoneization of every pipeline that we're building. The same with coal ports, the same with frac wells. Every place that people are trying to extend the fossil fuel infrastructure, people are doing their best to shut them down. And increasingly, as with Shell in the Arctic last summer, they're winning. And many, many thanks to all of you who are engaged in that work. And we'll just need more and more of it. In May, we're doing this large break free from fossil fuel day all over the planet, all kinds of groups coming together to do civil disobedience on resources around the planet, all the biggest coal mines and gas fields and things. The stuff that just literally has to stay in the ground. When we did this work even 5 or 6 years ago, we weren't completely clear what we were going to do instead to power our lives. We knew that this was not an option because it was going to wreck the world. Now, happily, we know what that alternative is. In the last 8 years, the price of a solar panel dropped 80%. It means we're at a moment now when if we wanted to, this planet could extend electricity to every person on Earth, and it could do it in ways that didn't damage the planet. The fact that we're not doing it on the scale that we need to reflects mainly the power of the fossil fuel industry to block wind turbines and solar panels. In this country, people like Warren Buffett and the Koch brothers are succeeding in getting utility commissions to make it all but impossible for people, even in the sunniest parts of the country, Arizona, Nevada, Florida, to put solar panels on their roof. They recognize what a dire threat to their business model they face. So, the fight is underway. It is a fight with real adversaries who behave in reprehensible ways. We learned earlier this year, for instance, that ExxonMobil knew everything there was to know about climate change 30 years ago. And instead of telling us, they, A, went to work climate-proofing their own facilities, raising their drilling rigs to account for this sea level rise they knew was coming. But B, spending tens of millions of dollars to build the architecture of deceit and denial and misinformation that kept us engaged in a pointless, phony argument about climate change for a quarter century. Had they merely said, you know what, our scientists say the same things as Jim Hansen, well, the debate would have ended in the early 1990s, and we would have gotten to work, and we'd be well on the way to solutions now. So now is the time to engage this battle. It is a battle, peaceful, nonviolent, but very real battle. And to do it using all the tools that the 20th century taught us were at our disposal. The great technology, if you will, of the 20th century. The greatest technology wasn't nuclear fission, and it wasn't genetic manipulation. It was the Gandhian discovery of nonviolence, a powerful tool to challenge power. And the subsequent development of that technology by people like Dr. King. And it is very good to speak to people who are in that tradition and to say that this is the tradition we need now to be calling on more and more and more. I helped organize the beginning of the Keystone Pipeline protest, what turned into the largest civil disobedience action by anything in this country in 30 years. I'd written a letter asking people to go to jail, and I stood there after I got out myself, day after day after day, watching as 1,200 and some people marched off to jail, and it was very moving and very powerful. And one of the things that made it powerful was the spirit in which people went. When I'd written the letter asking people to come, one of the things I said was I didn't think that young people should have to be the cannon fodder here. They're doing most of the leading in this movement all over the world. But if you're 22, you know, a arrest record may not be the very best thing for your resume. One of the few unmixed blessings of growing older is that past a certain point, what the hell are they going to do to you? And so it was with great pleasure to watch all kinds of people with hair like mine arriving in D.C. We did not ask people, how old are you? But we did, cleverly, I think, say who was president when you were born. And the two biggest cohorts were from the FDR and the Truman administrations. And that was good because, among other things, it let the young people who were there see elders acting the way elders need to act in a working society. That was very powerful. And we need much more of that. One of the sadnesses for me of this election season is watching the men trying to lead in the right direction, and other demographics, older voters finding it so hard to follow their lead. But we'll catch up someday. Another thing that was good about those arrests in Washington, from my point of view, was that we told everybody, if you want to get arrested, come wearing a necktie or thread. Not because I like formal wear, you can tell looking at me. I mean, I'm a good Vermonter. I wear a necktie only when I go to funerals, But
That's my dad.
we wanted to make the point that there was nothing radical in what we're asking for. Not when we asked for a peaceful world, and not when we asked for a world whose temperature is something like the world that all our human ancestors experienced. Those aren't radical demands in many ways. Those are conservative demands. Radicals work at oil companies. If you're willing to get up in the morning and make your fortune by changing the chemistry of the atmosphere, if you're willing to do it once scientists told you what would happen, if you're willing to do it once you watched the Arctic melt and they mooch and acidify, if you're willing to do that, then you're far more radical than anything anyone in the 60s ever dreamed about. You're dangerous radical, and we need to figure out how to rein you in. And together, that's what people around the world are trying to do. I cannot guarantee you that we're going to win this fight because we start out well behind, and it's the fight with the time limit. But I can't. Every night, there's thousands of meetings like this going on all over the planet that people try to figure out how to come together and build the kind of currency of movements in large enough quantity to stand up to the cold, hard cash that the fossil fuel industry can lay on the table. That's our job, and it is such an honor to get to do it with you all and to say thank you for the work that you've done and the work that you will do. And I will look forward to, I guess, seeing you in jail. And answering a few questions. I know we're already running behind because of our technological snafu. If there are a question or two, I'd be happy to try and take them on before your excellent panel emerges there.
Thank you very much, Bill. Was this one work?
Podium works. Podium
This
works
one
live.
works, yeah, but that's where we're gonna have Q&A.
Okay. Thanks for a lot, Bill. We're glad you gave us that talk. Glad you can answer a few questions for us.
Yes.
We're very fortunate here in Maine to not only have a lot of work going on the ground, but also some work going on in space, because we have the global network against weapons and nuclear power in space. We've asked Bruce Gagnon, who's the director of that network, to ask our first question for you. Bruce, I guess you can use this mic here, and then from then on we'll use this mic over here for questions if you want to line up.
Hi, Bill. Former editor of Earth Island Journal, Gar Smith, wrote in a recent article, despite being the planet's single greatest institutional consumer of fossil fuels, the Pentagon has been granted a unique exemption from reducing or even reporting its pollution. The U.S. won this prize during the 1998 Kyoto Protocol negotiations after the Pentagon insisted on a national security provision that would place its operations beyond global scrutiny or control. As then Undersecretary of State Stuart Eizenstat recalled, quote, every requirement the Defense Department and uniformed military who were at Kyoto by my side said they wanted, they got, unquote. Also exempted from pollution regulation, all Pentagon weapons testing, military exercises, NATO operations, and peacekeeping. So my question, in recent years, environmental and peace groups have been working hard to make links between issues as a way to advance movement building. Could you please comment on why you think this connection between the military's vast carbon bootprint and climate change has been so slow to develop? And what do you think of the call for conversion of the military-industrial complex to rail, wind, solar, and tidal power production? Thank you.
Well, I think that it's been slow to develop because, to use the Pentagon's terminology, we're in a target-rich environment here, and there are an endless number of places that need taking on. I think one of the things that's so amazing about the quantities in which we use fossil fuel is that, though, as you point out, the Pentagon is the single largest user of it, it still only represents a couple of percent of fuel that we use. Because there are just so many cars on the road and furnaces being run and everything else. It's the reason that economists long said that the smartest way to solve this problem, or one of the smartest, would be to put a price on carbon and methane right away, so that everybody, Pentagon included, would have to pay in its fuel bill for the damage that's being done. And so that everybody, the Pentagon included, would have some incentive to do something about it. So far, the fossil fuel industry has been able to block that. That's one of the reasons we keep going after them. But for the moment, it must be said that at least in most of the environmental movement, we think the weakest link is going after the fossil fuel industry. That's where we've been able to make some gains. Now, if you guys, when people have strong campaigns going on military conversion or whatever, I think that a lot of people will join them and work on them. But I got to tell you, people like me are already as completely stretched as it's possible for us to be. I mean, witness the fact that it's coming on 8 o'clock at night. Here I am, having it end of the day and talking with you all. When there are opportunities, people seize them. And as you build opportunities around other things, people will seize them. That's how movements work, I think. I'm very grateful for the work that you're doing and wish it the best of luck. And when it intersects, we'll do what we can to help. Just always understand that the people who are already working on this stuff are already working really hard, and in some sense, the last thing they need is, another assignment in the course of the day.
Next.
Hi, Bill. It's Heidi Biertaler from Freeport, Maine. We met at the high school there. I asked about David Suzuki's daughter there. I'm wanting to know what we can do. It seems that the First Nations and Indigenous cultures have been put out to pasture in the COP21 agreements in terms of not having the funds to be able to provide for their losses and damages. And I'm wondering what's being done to help us, and thank you for your Bold Nebraska bug, because we love what Jane Club is doing with it, and with the Reject and Protect and Cowboy and Indian Alliance. Thank you for that. And but I wanted to know what's being done on a global effort to put together a global fund to help all of those communities that are being left behind in the wake of the formal agreements. It seems like a lot of individual organizations have major concerns about this, but what is being done on a more global level to help bring all of those organizations together to make up for what the COP is really supposed to do?
Well, that's a very good question. You got to know that indigenous groups are in the absolute lead of this fight everywhere around the world. They're doing amazing work, and they're not. I mean, I was with them all in Paris. They're not slowing up for a second. I saw a great press conference this morning in Canada with many of the great Canadian First Nations leaders, Bill Erasmus from the NA, and we're stepping up the opposition to pipelines across their territory. The emergence of a very strong and powerful Indigenous movement on this continent and around the world over the last 5 years is one of the most exciting and hopeful things that there is. And we just all need to pitch in behind them. Check out the Indigenous Environmental Work Network, IEN. Check out Idle No More. They don't need, any of us feeling sorry for them or whatever. But we just need our support on the very good fight that they're working on. And they overlap very much with the work that climate scientists are doing and state groups are doing. And they were the absolute linchpin of the fight against the Keystone Pipeline and against the Gateway Pipeline up north in Canada, and now the Energy East Pipeline across Ontario and Quebec. They're deep in the fight against fracked gas on both sides of the border. And there are terrific links up and down the hemisphere and really around the world with Indigenous people everywhere. Our colleagues in the South Pacific, and one of the reasons that I've been talking to PG all the time the last couple of weeks, Indigenous people there are, they're maybe the single best climate warriors in the whole world, doing amazing, nonviolent, peaceful work to blockade coal ports, on and on and on. But these are just our colleagues, have to be in this movement everywhere, and many of its best leaders and many of the people that I'm closest to and like best in this work. So I'm very glad to see you recognizing them.
So is there an effort to get a global movement together, to have a global fund?
I don't know if there's a global fund, but there's definitely, what I'm going to get, there's definitely a global movement, which there is the front of. Far more than, a fund or whatever, what they need, want, demand is environmental justice, an end to these kinds of practices. They're organizing hard to stop incursions on their land, to stop violations of treaty rights, to stop all the things that are wrecking their land and livelihood. And that's, I think, where the rest of us can be the most use.
Thank you, Bill.
Hi, Bill. This is Brian Sousa from the student newspaper here, the Free Press. And you said that there was some progress made on the COP21 agreements. However, as you know, those agreements aren't binding legally. So if we have someone come into office that wants to bypass those agreements or work, as the president, work against such progress, how can we, besides the economic tax on carbon, enforce these agreements to make sure they actually happen? Because if partner states that we've worked with, such as various industrialized countries that really owe developing countries a chance at making some progress because they'll be impacted the most with sea level rise, etc., or spread of the Zika virus and whatnot. Without some kind of actual incentive, legal incentive or binding incentive, it doesn't seem like the Paris Agreement will weigh very much in international relations.
You can't enforce them legally. They're not going to be enforced legally. You need movements to make them real. Look, the reason that wasn't a binding agreement in Paris and that there won't be a binding agreement about anything soon is because the rest of the world looks at our dysfunctional political system and knows that that's the obstacle. The reason there was no attempt to negotiate a treaty is because the rest of the world knows the U.S. Constitution requires 2/3 of the senators in the U.S. Senate to approve a treaty, and there's not the slightest chance on God's green earth that any time in the foreseeable future you're going to get 2/3 of the U.S. Senate to approve a reasonable treaty about climate change. They're bought and paid for by the fossil fuel industry. That's why they're bought and paid for by the fossil fuel industry. So we do what we can to get good pledges and promises, and then as movements we fight to hold them to them. If the world said we're going to try and stay at 1.5 degrees, time now that anyone proposes a new coal mine or a new coal port or anything else, we're like, how can you do that? And you said you wanted to hold things at 1.5 degrees, and we're going to hold you to your word. We're never going to reach a point where we don't need movements, where there's some kind of, great agreement or World Supreme Court or something. We're not going to get there in a time that's relevant to the physics of climate change. We're going to need to keep fighting and struggling and building movements. That's what we do.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hey Bill, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Sarah LaChance from 350 Main. I just wanted to share that a lot of us in 350 Main and others probably in this room and obviously beyond are starting to gear up to really work to get our delegation down in DC to say no to the TPP. And I was wondering if you might share with us tonight a little bit about how much this would absolutely crush a lot of our work should it be passed, and to give us some words of inspiration on how we might move forward.
So many, many thanks for that. You guys are doing awards work. This is incredibly important. I think it might actually be a fight that we can win. And one of the reasons we can win it is because the fossil fuel industry and their greed made a mistake last month when TransCanada Corporation said that they were going to sue under existing trade agreements, NAFTA, for $15 billion because they weren't allowed to build the Keystone Pipeline. That demonstrates the folly of these agreements we keep signing. Millions of American citizens rose up to demand that that not happen. It produced more democracy, more emails to the Senate, more public comments to the State Department than any project in history. And if that can be overturned by some secret NAFTA court of people who were never elected to anything, then our sovereignty and our democracy is not worth having. That's what these trade agreements are about. And that's what to bear in mind as you make the effort to keep the main delegation doing the right thing. It's been very good to watch the events of the last few months. There's been enough pressure from Bernie Sanders and others that Hillary Clinton, who helped write the TPP, has now come out against it. Okay? And that demonstrates that it has no real popular support, supported only by the corporations that want that kind of kangaroo court run by their own kind to approve everything they do. So keep up the work. It's working. And everyone stay poised on this, ready to write on march as the moment arrives.
Thank you, Bill, for these words of encouraging us for nonviolent action. And I know we have a wonderful panel coming up, and so we'll let you get back to work.
All right. Thank you guys so much.